Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It is my absolute pleasure to be here to talk about how AI will change education. I must admit, maybe first off, that I wanted to sort of shoehorn AI into this talk a little bit, because what I'm really passionate about is education. So my question is really, how is AI going to play a role in that? But first, we have to understand the bigger picture of how education actually works, or doesn't work in some cases. You may have seen this clip. This is an AI tutor from 10 months ago, so let's take a look.
Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect. Correct. Now, looking at the triangle, which side do you think is the hypotenuse?
Really,
Remember the hypotenuse?
I'm not totally sure. I think it might be this one, but I really am not sure. This side AC.
You're close. Actually, side AC is called the adjacent side to the angle alpha. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle and is directly opposite the right angle. Can you find which one is the hypotenuse?
Oh, okay, I see. So I think the hypotenuse is this really long side from A to B. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Well done.
Okay, so it's pretty impressive. And again, this was 10 months ago, so AI tutors have only gotten better, I'm sure, in that time. I think if you had told me 5 years ago that such a technology would exist, I might not have believed you. AI, as we all know, has gone incredibly quickly. So the question is this the future? Is this how everyone's going to be learning in the future? Well, I wanted to reflect on two things. The first is that you can always complain about education. You can do it now. People were doing it 10 years, 100 years ago. You can always complain about the state of education, and I can kind of see why. I've got some examples of like the failures of the education system for you right here.
What's water made of?
Water?
Yeah. What makes water?
Water.
Okay, what elements does it take to make water?
H2O.
So what does that mean?
It is water.
Yes, H2O, it is water. Okay, this one seems like it's maybe going in a good direction, but then it takes a turn. See if you can spot where things go wrong.
So what's happening to the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere right now?
Well, I guess we've got this whole climate change, and and I guess people believe that obviously carbon dioxide is a impacts on climate change. So carbon dioxide, everything emits carbon dioxide. Trees, human beings. I guess like animals.
So
and
the trees are contributing to the...
Oh, definitely, but it's definitely. So so trees are, I guess, the one of the original primary sources of emitters of CO2.
It's the trees, guys. I don't know if you knew. Just cut them all down. We'll be okay. Those CO2 emitting trees. Yeah, it's not good. You could always complain about education. You can always say, it's no good. So we can ask the question, why aren't people learning? You might point to certain things. Maybe the education system is stale. Maybe it was made to create factory workers. Maybe it's because we didn't have AI tutors yet. I'm going to come back to this question, but I think it is an important one to think about what is really going on. What are the outcomes we're getting from the school system, and why? The other thing I wanted to point to, the second thing, is this word revolutionize when it comes to education. Here we have a book by Sal Khan. You saw him in the first video, Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education. But he's not the only one saying this. 4 ways AI could revolutionize education technology, or how AI is revolutionizing the world of education. So clearly, the expectation of a revolution is here. But the truth is, people expecting a revolution in education have been around for at least 100 years. We have Thomas Edison. This is in 1922. The motion picture is destined to revolutionize our educational system, and in a few years it will supplant largely, if not entirely, the use of textbooks. You remember how we got rid of textbooks, right, 100 years ago? He said something like, education from a textbook is 2% efficient, whereas education from a motion picture is 98% efficient. I have no idea where he came up with those numbers. I don't think anyone does. But you can imagine that in his time, the motion picture would have seemed like magic. In the same way that first clip I showed you of an AI agent tutoring a kid and doing it somewhat competently, that also seems like magic. So you can see why this argument for revolution is kind of convincing. In the 1930s, you had people saying radio would revolutionize education. Why? Because you could get rid of all the teachers, you could just have like babysitters in the classroom, and then you'd have the expert radio in, and they could radio in to 1,000 classrooms. So immediately you have this economy of scale. And people see the same thing today. Elon Musk says AI education will be like having Einstein as a teacher for every child. It's this same idea. We're going to scale up the best and the brightest. We're going to have this most intelligent entity teaching everyone instead of, I don't know, what we have today. Okay, so in the 1950s, it was TV. Academics actually conducted studies where they would have a lecture going on in one room like this one, and then they'd have it videoed and closed-circuit TV in the lecture room next door. And they would test the students to see who learned more or less. The answer, no significant difference. No big surprise, because they're getting basically the same experience, assuming the TV system works reasonably well. Then in the 1980s, I think people at MIT anyway thought that they had it. They thought they had the revolution in education, because the thing we had been missing was interactivity. And now you could actually interact with the computer, you could go back and forth with it, you could program. So there was this idea that if we taught kids how to program, say how to program a turtle, then they would get better reasoning skills overall. What happened? The kids got proficient at programming the turtle, but those skills did not transfer to other sorts of reasoning. We didn't get better thinkers, and that was the concept. That was why computers and interactive computers and doing this whole turtle programming was meant to revolutionize education once more. In the 1990s, you get this, the use of video discs in classroom instruction is increasing every year and promises to revolutionize what will happen in the classroom of tomorrow. I don't know, many of you here may not know what a video disc is. It was a huge CD-like thing, like a DVD. I used to use these when I was in high school, so, they were there. Did they revolutionize education? No. There's one more I'll talk about, MOOCs, massive open online courses. About 13 years ago, this was all the rage. The big idea that can revolutionize higher education. It's the MOOC. Will MOOCs revolutionize higher education? At least they're asking a question. Revolution hits the universities. No, it's hit. The phenomenon of MOOCs revolutionizing education in the digital age. The online education revolution drifts off course. Gets sad. The MOOC revolution may not be as disruptive as some had imagined. Why MOOCs won't revolutionize higher ed? What if MOOCs revolutionize education after all? A story in 10 headlines. Anyway, I hope you take my point. People are all too excited, all too ready to put the word revolutionize next to education. This is old school, new school, it's the same school. What is going on? We shouldn't be using this word revolutionize. You keep using that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. You know it's a good talk if there's a Princess Bride reference. Okay. So why didn't these revolutions materialize, or why didn't they eventuate? You could say educational institutions, they have a lot of inertia, they're not willing to change, we're all just set in our ways. You could say it was just technological overhype. Or you could say we didn't have the capabilities of AI yet. This time is different. Or maybe it's something else. So I'm going to explore this concept a little bit. I think one hint comes from this clip, a question that I asked to some people in Los Angeles. So let's take a look. You go into a toy store, and there's a toy bat and a toy ball. Together they cost $1.10. And the bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
10 cents.
We're all wrong, aren't we?
Think about what is the answer. What is the answer? 5 cents. Yes, very good. Now, like, I don't think these people are silly. I don't think they're stupid. I think they could work it out. You know, if the ball was 10 cents and the bat was $1 more than the ball, it would be $1.10. And so together, they would be $1.20, right? So the correct answer, obviously, you guys know it, 5 cents. So why do they all say 10 cents? It's because that number came to their head as they listened to the question. They don't know where that number came from, but it was in their head, and it sounded right, so they blurted it out, all at the same time. Really quite amazing, right? Something I love about that clip. So why do they do that? Well, the insights are in this book, which is one of my favorite books of all time, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So in the book, he's talking about our two systems of thought. That we've got two kinds of processes going on in our brains at one time. The fast processes, system 1, and slow processes, system 2. And at the start of one of his chapters, he imagines, what if there was a Hollywood movie where these systems are turned into characters? And so I decided to take that inspiration and run with it. So I created these two characters inside my head. System 1 is on the left, and System 2 is on the right. Now, System 2 is kind of the person who you think you are. That's the voice in your head. It's a slow, effortful system. You know, thinking takes some effort. If you ask him to multiply like 13 times 17, he's going to say, I don't want to do it. But you could force him to do it, and he can go through a series of steps. So that's the thing about System 2, is it's slow, it's methodical, it can catch mistakes, it can work through processes, it can think about thinking. Now, System 1, on the other hand, is rapid fire. This guy's doing things fast in the background. You have no idea that he's doing it. He's collecting all the information from your senses. He's pulling out the relevant information, and he is getting rid of everything else because you're just getting bombarded with stimuli. So he's pulling out those key pieces of information that you're going to work with. And he does all of this without you, the System 2 thinking conscious thing, really being aware that he's doing it. And you noticed also that he was like in a library setting. So he's sort of associated with all of your long-term memory. So he's got all of that, and that's what allows him to work so quickly and so effectively. And when those people said 10 cents to me, he served up the answer, 10 cents, and this guy, System 2, was just like, yeah, 10 cents. Like, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to check that answer. He could check the answer, but he doesn't want to because he's lazy, and fair enough. The goal for us should not be always to use System 2, but it should be for us to know when we need System 2 versus when System 1 will be fine. So the idea is, hopefully you want to optimize, allow System 1 to handle everything that they can handle and only hand off to System 2 things that you need to. Now in my travels, I came across these two characters, and something that I thought about later was that they almost embody System 1 and System 2 together. So the question that I asked them was like, how long does it take for the Earth to go around the sun? Okay, so how long does it take for the Earth to go around the sun?
What do you reckon, cuz? Isn't it 24 hours? Obviously a day, yes.
Okay. I asked the question to System 2. He was like, I don't want to, like, what do you think, you know? System 1 over here, what do you think? He was like, obviously a day. It sounds good. Yeah, a day. Sun comes up, sun goes down. Yeah. And then what did he do? He just spat it out. He didn't stop to think about it. He was like, obviously, yeah, it's a day. What was amazing about this conversation was this conversation moved on, and I had a whole set of questions that I asked them. I think at this point I was asking them, did dinosaurs live at the same time as humans or something silly like that? Anyway, that's what I was doing. And then I noticed a pause, and I was like looking at his face, and you could see that he was thinking. You could see that System 2 had snapped into action. So I just didn't interrupt, okay? Watch what happens.
Hey, the Earth doesn't take one day to get around the sun. It takes like a year.
You see the shock on his face. The whole time he was just running System 1, and then at the very end it was like, whoa, hang on, wait a minute. All right. The thing about System 2 is that it is very limited. So this paper came out in '55, it's a classic. The magical number 7 plus or minus 2, the limits on our capacity for processing information. So the idea here was really that you can only handle 7 new things in your working memory that System 2 can deal with at one time, plus or minus 2. It turns out, over the years, that estimate of 7 has been revised down to about 4. And there's a test you can do to kind of assess this and figure out, okay, what is my span? How many pieces of information can I just work with at one time? So the way this test goes is I show you some numbers that you can look at briefly, and then I take them away, and what you try to do is say each number on the beat. There should be like a beat going. I don't know how we're going to do that, but you say each number, but you add 1 to it. So increment each digit by 1 after the numbers have disappeared. I think I'll do it for you so you guys don't feel weird about this. But I just wanted to demonstrate how we can show that this span is quite limited. Okay, so hopefully I get this right because I know what the numbers are. Okay, so here we go. There's some numbers. 6, 5, 0, 2, right? Okay, that wasn't too hard. You can make the task harder by, instead of adding 1, you add 3. And instead of having 4 numbers, you can go to 5 or to 6 to really push yourself and see what happens. What's amazing about this task, what's interesting about it, is that while you're doing it, while you're really activating System 2, there's physiological responses that take place. Your heart beats a bit faster, your skin gets a little sweatier, and interestingly, your pupils dilate. So when you're really thinking hard, when you're using that System 2 thinking, your pupils are actually expanding just a little bit. So I got a super macro lens and some friends, and I showed them numbers and then got them to do the add 1 task. And so we can try to see if you can spot the growing in the pupil of this eye while he's doing the task. Here we go.
4, 3, 9, 7, 2.
Okay. There it goes a little bit.
5, 4, 0,
Yeah.
8, 3.
I feel like in the middle, when he's like in the middle of the numbers and he's still got to remember the remaining numbers, and it's like, you know, like it's just, and then at the end it sort of starts collapsing back. He's like, okay, now I can relax a little bit again. So it's interesting to see just how effortful this is. This measure is known as cognitive load, or another way of thinking of how much mental effort you are investing in something. And we can break down how the cognitive load is being expended into 3 categories. So there's intrinsic cognitive load, which is just the amount of cognitive load you need for a particular task. So in that case, you know, if I'm giving you 6 numbers, it's going to require a large intrinsic cognitive load. Or sometimes when we're doing something in physics, even something simple like F equals ma, which to, you know, physicists and stuff kind of is not that hard, but for a new student, each of those things is new and sophisticated. It's a complex concept. And so in fact, even that, just teaching that has a large intrinsic cognitive load. There's also things that are totally extraneous. These could be things like, I don't know, maybe there's someone chewing next to you or your seat's uncomfortable. There's just distractions and things around you that are taking away from your ability to focus. So extraneous cognitive load is not great. And then finally we have germane cognitive load, which is, can you actually use your attention, use System 2 to do some maybe thinking about thinking, like observing kind of what you're going through as you're thinking through a problem, or noticing things that might be helpful patterns for you to use later. So germane load is great if you can get it. Now when it comes to, this is another really classic study. Because one question you might have is, if we have such a limited system too, how do we accomplish anything? And if you go back several decades, people were wondering, what makes a chess master a chess master? Do they have really high IQ? Do they have great spatial reasoning? Do they have a really large working memory span, which is the kind of thing that we've been looking at? You know, what makes them unique? And these researchers got together and they did a study where they showed some different level chess players from beginner, intermediate, and grandmaster. I don't know if they were grandmaster, maybe just a master, but someone who's very experienced in chess. They showed these different people a chessboard like this that was basically stopped in the middle of a game, okay? They showed them this chessboard for 5 seconds. They had it in front of them, chessboard's there. And then they covered up the chessboard and they had another blank chessboard beside it. And they said to these chess players, okay, you've seen it for 5 seconds. Now put the pieces on the board exactly as they were in that chessboard that you just observed. When you ask novices to do this, they've only seen it for 5 seconds. When you ask the novice to do this, they will get about 4 pieces correct after looking at the board just once. In further iterations of the study, they were allowed to look at it for another 5 seconds and then put some more down. And so they were sort of counting up how many it took. But just on the first glance, a beginner could do 4 pieces. The grandmaster could do 16 pieces after one glance, after just 5 seconds of looking at it. Why were the grandmasters so good at remembering where all those pieces were on the board? It's a lot. It's because of a phenomenon called chunking, which is where you can see things that look like disparate bits of information, separate pieces of information, but you can actually see them as one thing. So in the case of the example I gave you earlier, if you reverse the order of these numbers, you get 1945. Which is no longer 4 numbers, it's one thing, the year that the Second World War ended, right? And so that makes it much easier to remember. And this is true for basically everything we come into contact with. We're not normally dealing with it in its most basic chunk. So words, you know, you don't have to parse out every letter. Even phrases, you know, they have meaning and you can think of them as one thing. Or equations, like this one for a physicist, those become one thing. Even the Schrödinger equation, yes, for a lot of people in the room, I imagine that's just a single entity in working memory and you don't have to, you know, you could write that down, you could close your eyes and write it down again. So the point is that the more we get experience with things, the more we practice, the more we interact, the more we use System 2 to work through problems, the more we develop this long-term memory. And that long-term memory allows us to chunk the things in our world, and that allows us to deal with much more complex situations. So that's exactly what's happening with a chess master. I have heard a lot of people say this: that class really taught me how to think, or that teacher taught me how to think. And I think that's more of a question than it might seem at first. I mean, at first it might seem like, yeah, that feels reasonable. Like, I think a lot of us have this experience where we feel like, oh yeah, after that I really learned how to think, I learned how to reason. But if you go back to this chessboard study, the next thing they did as part of the study was they rearranged the pieces, same number of pieces as before, but now they positioned them as though they would never occur in a regular chess match. They just put the pieces all over the place at random. You would never ever see this in a regular chess match. And they tested again the novices and the masters. And now the masters did no better than the novices. The thing that made them so good at remembering where the pieces should go was that they had seen a lot of chessboards. They'd seen a lot of configurations just like that. And if the pattern wasn't there, then they were no better off than the novices. It's the exact same situation. My argument here is that there is no general thinking skill. There is no general problem-solving skill. What there is are these complex webs of long-term memory. This is what we build up over our lifetimes. So a physicist is not necessarily going to be a good chess player. And a chess player is not going to be a good physicist. This applies to all domains, I would say. I mean, you can make arguments for specifics where you could say, yes, this such and such skill will transfer. But I think in general, the idea is an expert in one field is not an expert in another. And it's just because of this. It's because that long-term memory that your System 1 is working with is really specialized to reflect the experiences you've had and to have recognized all the patterns in those experiences to allow you to chunk new situations when they come to you. It's so powerful when your System 1 is this really complex web that you don't even feel like you're thinking. In the same way that those people said 10 cents to me, if you ask Magnus Carlsen, what is he doing when he plays chess?
Most of the time, I know what to do. I don't have to figure it out.
Right? He's saying, I don't need System 2. System 1 is so well developed that it can solve any problem at a glance. For him, chess is a game of recognition. He recognizes the board in the same way that we recognize faces, or physicists recognize a physics problem, right? That's the way we get to be really good at things. So really what we want to be doing in education is using System 2's resources very carefully and repeatedly such that we store information in long-term memory to allow our System 1 to do things that effectively feel automatic. So, what are the implications of this for education? The first one is that we should eliminate extraneous cognitive load, which is fairly obvious. So you should have a comfortable seat, you should be able to see the board, everything should be legible, the sound from my microphone should be pristine and pure. I shouldn't have an accent. If I have an accent, it makes it harder for you. That's extraneous, just trying to think, what was that word? Stuff like that. Having subtitles sometimes helps. My wife loves to watch all TV shows with subtitles. So now that's what I do too. And yeah. So how can we limit intrinsic cognitive load? This is point number 2. We don't want to overfill what you can handle. And my guess for you is that the reason why a lot of physics lectures fail, sometimes if they do, is because the professor doesn't limit intrinsic cognitive load enough. They go through too much novel material in the one lesson, and it's just too much for anyone to handle in terms of their working memory. Once you're overloaded, there's basically nothing you can do. Your System 2 doesn't, know how to deal with that. So one thing I would say, when you're teaching is you have to try to obviously start where your students are, and you have to keep the work kind of bite-sized, because as soon as you start introducing 4, 5, 6 novel concepts in one lesson, you're going to lose people. Another way to think about limiting intrinsic cognitive load when it comes to music is get people to play songs that they already know. This is why we do that, I think, right? Learning to read music takes time and effort, so the first things you're going to do with students is get them to play songs they already know. Then they know what the rhythm should be. And so even though, yes, in theory they should know how to read these notes and they should know what a quarter note is and understand the beats, I can tell you, as someone who played French horn for several years, I didn't really know how to read music for at least a couple years after I started playing. The music told me what fingers to push down because I could have understood the notes. But in terms of rhythms and things like that, and really being able to sight read music, I think it took a couple years. So I think this is one of those things where we limit intrinsic cognitive load by getting students to play songs they already know. Another way to limit intrinsic cognitive load is to slow things down. So anyone who's practicing music, for example, like this harpist, who's a friend of mine, she describes her practice like this.
You can practice everything exactly as it is and exactly as it's written, but at just such a speed that you have to think about and know exactly where you are and what your fingers are doing and what it feels like.
So she's really talking about using System 2 there, very slowly, deliberately, effortfully, thinking through every little thing that she's doing in those moments. And then once she does that enough times, enough repetitions of this, you get something that looks like this. So good, right? Every time I see, superhuman performance, the thing that I'm thinking about is how they have used System 2 very slowly and effortfully to build up that structure in long-term memory that allows them to do things that look so amazing and effortless. It's also at this point that I bring up this idea that discovery learning can be dangerous. When I was going through school, I'd say the dominant paradigm in education was something called constructivism. And the basic tenet of constructivism is that students are active constructors of their own knowledge. Something I do not disagree with. It's basically what I'm saying up here, that System 2 is about being active and effortful in how we engage with material, how we practice. The problem is, I think some people didn't know how to implement teaching for this constructivist paradigm. Their thinking was, if the students need to be active, then telling won't work. But that's not true. I'm telling you stuff right now. But I bet you're still being active and effortful in your brains, which is the place where you need to be active and effortful. So that was the problem with constructivism. And it led to some classrooms where people really pulled the scaffolding away from students, I would argue, too early. So it was, we want to teach problem solving? Here's a problem. Solve it. You don't know how to do that? Figure it out. Construct. And this is just my personal pet peeve. I have some hang-ups about constructivism. But this is where I say discovery learning can be dangerous. I can see flip sides of it. For example, if you go to a new city and you don't use a GPS, it's really hard to figure out where you have to go. But if you do it, and you use your System 2 to figure out and follow every street and look at all the signs around and you read these things and you're looking really carefully at everything, at the end of that, you'll probably be able to retrace your steps. If you use the GPS, it'll be much easier for you. You're offloading processing from System 2, you're offloading it to the GPS. Can you find your way back? No. You're going to need the GPS to find your way back. I think there has to be some balance in education between the kind of GPS guidance and the internal guidance. Ideally, I would love to see like a gradual phasing out of the support to allow, the person to figure out the directions on their own. This has been, I think, well backed up in research of things like the worked example effect. And this is even a further idea of sort of fading out the assistance as you go. But the idea of first giving someone, hey, here's a problem, and here's how you solve it. Here's a problem, but it's not quite at the end. Here's a problem partially done, and here's one for you to do from start to finish, right? But it is this idea of I'm going to reduce your intrinsic cognitive load. I'm not just going to give you this problem at the end and say, figure it out. I'm going to give you this scaffolding because I know that what your working memory is very limited. That System 2 has very limited resources, and I'm not going to tax them with you trying to think about all sorts of things at the same time. I'm going to give you this assistance. So to me, this is the scaffolding that helps System 1 move through and learn new problems. I think, again, this is kind of a problem we have in complex domains like physics, where to the physics professor, everything's perfectly clear, because their System 1 is so fully developed. But to a student, it's not. So this is the expert-novice divide. The professor can't see with the student eyes what that problem looks like, right? Only the student can see it that way. Okay, so what else do we need to do in education? We need to repeat that effortful practice until we achieve mastery. Why is mastery so important? Because when you show a skill with mastery, that means it's now a System 1 domain. For example, for all of us here in the room, our basic times tables, I imagine, are mastered. They're in System 1. You don't have to think about it. What's so useful about that? When you come to do other problems which require that information, you're not going to overload System 2 when you do it, because all that stuff is automatic. So that's the key. That's how we're going to get better and better performance, is by building up more and more capabilities which are automatic. If you never get to the level of mastery, then moving on is going to always cause you problems, because you're going to be having to use extra areas in your working memory to deal with thinking about that first before you can think about the other thing. Next we have increased domain load. So how do you get people to engage in really active thinking, extra level active thinking? One thing that was tried, for example, with this problem, okay, so the bat and ball problem is actually from a test. I think it's called the cognitive reflection test. And I think there's actually 3 questions on this test. The bat and ball problem is only 1. But this test has been given out to thousands and thousands of people around the world, including incoming students at very elite colleges. And when you give this test, you typically find that about 90% of people get at least 1 wrong. At least 90% get at least 1 of the 3 questions wrong, and they're all kind of like the bat and ball problem in a certain way. So then what some researchers tried was, they thought, instead of printing out this test in like really clear font on nice white paper, we are going to print it out in like a terrible, very hard to read font, maybe photocopy it a few extra times so it gets really difficult to read, and crumple up the paper or something, and then we'll hand it out. And what happens? Well, the error rate drops to 35%. Making the test harder to read made students more likely to answer it correctly. Why? Because they didn't have that easy, like, okay, I can read it and an answer immediately comes to mind. They didn't have that experience. Instead, what they had was, oh, this is challenging to read, which kicked their system 2 into action, and so it was activated and was able to find the correct answer. So I'm not suggesting this is a good strategy, just making things more confusing, but I will say it can be effective. And I feel like I'm seeing advertisers apply this sort of principle sometimes. In the old days of advertising, like the 50s, 60s, I feel like it was all about having a jingle, showing what your product did, why it was better than your competitors, and then having this great jingle that would just get stuck in your head and you'd all remember the name of the brand and why it's better, and And then these days, I think we've got so bombarded by advertising that System 1 has got great at tuning it out. And so now a new strategy I see some advertisers employ is, let's confuse people. This was a billboard that I saw in Sydney, near the beach, and I was definitely intrigued. The power of unexplained, television, uncost the earth, unpay more, unspend more. It didn't really tell you anything. It's like, how is this good advertising? A few days later at a bus stop, I saw this, unexplained. With there is no stress, just unstress. No hassle, just unhassle. With you can undo what you did. You can undrive through the car wash with the window down, or unbreak dance in front of your teenage son and his mates, or unflood the downstairs laundry that now doubles as the pool room. Makes life relaxing and unreal. Your life. Be happy and live for now. Don't worry, unworry. What is this an ad for? Insurance. Yes, this is an insurance ad. But how lame are insurance ads? And this is pretty great. So they really got me. So what role is AI going to play if you believe in this picture of education that I've painted? I think the positive role that I see for AI is that it can provide timely feedback. And that's essential. When you are learning any skill, you're going to go through the repeated rounds of practice, and you're going to need immediate feedback in order to learn. When you're playing the harp, if you miss a note, you know immediately. That's great immediate feedback. If you're practicing tennis and your shot's in or out, you probably know, if it hits the net or goes over, you know right away. So these are really helpful in terms of training your brain. There are some different industries and some different professions where people seem like experts, but they're actually not. Stock pickers is one example, because you may get some feedback that maybe this was a good decision or a bad decision. But honestly, the stock market is, at least in the short term, incredibly random. And so that feedback is never very informative for what you should do the next time. This has also been shown with political pundits and some economists, anyone who's looking to predict these future trends which are much less reliable in terms of the validity of the environment. So one thing I see AI doing is providing this timely feedback, which will really help, as we saw in the first case with Saul Khan and his son. But the thing that I'm really worried about is how AI has this opportunity to reduce effortful practice. I have 4 kids who are 8, 6, 4, and 0. And I worry about them that, you know, if they're going to be, will they write an essay? Will they write 100 essays? If there is a generative AI that can write for them, what forces them to practice crafting those sentences? And if they don't craft those sentences, what happens to their brains? The argument here is that you get good at your command of the English language. You get good at being able to speak in front of people, at being able to express your thoughts in writing by doing it again and again and again and again. And you should suck at the beginning. And you shouldn't let that stop you, and you should keep going and going and making slight tweaks and improving and getting feedback and getting going. If they never do that, I really worry. What gets into System 1? You know, what is that? Do they have an amazing network of connected knowledge that they can draw on? Do they have things that are automated? I fear that they won't. How do we force people to have to do that painful, effortful work when there's a magic machine that'll do it for you? That's a big concern. What about drawing? You know, if you can just ask it to make a picture of whatever you like. The bat and the ball was AI, by the way. I can't draw. So, but again, like, what will happen to people's artistic abilities? So this is, I think, my biggest concern, is if it prevents us from going through this painful, effortful process, which is the core process of learning, using your limited System 2 resources to engage with things and practice again and again and again, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't feel good, even when you're not great at it. That is my big concern. I want to come back to these 2 big questions. Why aren't people learning, and why haven't the education revolutions materialized? To the first question, I want to be a little bit more generous to the people we saw at the beginning of this talk. Our brains are designed to help us be effective in this world, which means finding food and shelter, finding a mate, integrating socially so that we're not ostracized, you know, being able just to hang out and have fun. Like, all of those things are what we should be doing. And maybe it shouldn't be such a surprise that people don't know what elements it takes to make water, or even that CO2 could pose an existential threat. I know everyone in this room will agree, like, that's important. We should all know that, and we should figure out how to work with that. I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's understandable that a lot of people don't focus on that, don't know that, don't think about it. It's not part of the world that they exist in. Just because, you know, they're so busy with social media and Instagram or whatever, because that's about connecting with other people. So I want to be a little bit generous there. And when it comes to this question of why haven't education revolutions materialized with film and TV and radio and computers and MOOCs and now AI, part of me wants to say, I think we might have already found the best thing. Being in a room with other people, other learners, a teacher, and some time to talk. Education it's a social activity. You know, people care about other people. I think that the tech hype comes from a place of believing that the problem of education is not being able to get the information to the student. That's not the problem. It's not the problem now, and it wasn't the problem 100 years ago. When you have books, I mean, the information is all there, assuming people have access, the students had access to those books, and yet they're probably not going to learn very much unless they have a great teacher, unless they have a group of like-minded peers to go through that with them, unless they have a reason to do it. An analogy for you. You know, the world is full of heavy objects, and yet most people are not ripped. Do you see where I'm going with this? The world is full of fields. Not many people running on them. There's plenty of ways to get exercise, but obesity is a huge problem. I hope the analogy, I'll get there. I think about teachers, because I was one, I kind of am one. I think about teachers a little bit like personal trainers. Like the gyms are there, but unless there's someone who you're going and you're meeting there and you're held accountable to, and someone to say,